good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for paying attention and being focused on I'm realizing I'm doing the last presentation for the day before the panel discussion. So appreciate you being over here. So as was introduced, my name is Juha Launonen. I'm coming from Cisco and working at Cisco in Finland and Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia with our security offering. Originally, I'm coming from SourceFire, as SourceFire got bought by Cisco about half a year ago. And I've been working in Nordics and in the Baltics at SourceFire for over 6 years. And before that, even before that, I had some life. So I was working for a Finnish security vendor called StoneSoft. So I've been working in the security field for way over 10 years. So please, if you have any questions about anything in my presentation, just shoot them out. I'm glad to answer them on the spot. So feel free to ask any questions. So I think all the presentations so far I've been seeing today have been very good. So I think kind of me having the opportunity to kind of framework a bit as we see many of these things have been discussed today, how we see them from the vendor perspective, security vendor perspective, as we would like to give you a clear view on how we see things should be done today. As the title says, the new model for security. It's a very demanding title to present, actually, that what the new model for security then would be or should be, why we need a new model. Isn't the things we've been doing so far been enough? And if so or not, then what actually needed to be done and why and how? So I'm trying to cover these topics. And if you disagree on anything, feel free to shout out and ask, what do you think like that, or what do you say like that? Just one practical question before starting. How many of you know Snort? Quite many. So do you know the relation between Snort and SourceFire and now Cisco? How these things come together? Anyone explaining that? I have a couple of gifts over here, so I'm happy to give out. Nobody volunteers? You over there? No? Ah, okay. Okay. So I'll save them for the next question then. But explaining how that goes. So Snort is the widest spread security, we could call it solution or toolbox in the world. And we have originally developed it. So our CTO, now the head security architect of Cisco, Mr. Marty Rash, originally developed Snort. And as nowadays, we have learned that open source in security also means openness and ability to share information between different organizations and parties involved, like in a way got already mentioned in some of the earlier presentations. That's a great value that we at Cisco also value. And that heritage comes from the open source world to our commercial security offering as well nowadays, as we are supporting open rules, open detection for all the vulnerabilities and etc. also in our commercial security solutions, which is important when we consider some of the governmental or military or defense or internal defense security organizations, let's say around the government or any of the other institutions like finance institutions, sharing information about something being detected somewhere that also the other parties of this community would benefit on knowing and being able to defend themselves against. So that's why I wanted to highlight this Snort, so you all remember. maybe a bit of that during the presentation. But to the agenda, why we need a new model for security? I think it's quite well concluded over here. And I will explain a bit more detail, about each of these things. But changing business models, nonetheless, set us new challenges all the time. So in a good side, when working in the security, means that we will have some work to be done in the upcoming years as well, which is good. And then the dynamic threat landscape. Well, any of you have been seeing security presentations lately, probably have been seeing different stories about dynamic threat landscape. I think there's lots of stories to be told in that area. And then finally, the complexity and fragmentation of our infrastructure, and especially the security infrastructure in this case. Does it actually serve the purposes and the needs we have today? When everything else, especially the business models, are so evolving, so developing so fast all the time. Are we actually following with the same phase with our security and all of those processes and solutions that we should be using and doing? I think the answer is most likely no. So, about these changing business models, there's some examples over here, and I think one of the things worth thinking about is that how many things we have connected to internet nowadays, today, this year. It's about 10 billion. But they are saying that in the next, not much more than 5 years, it will be 5 times the same amount. So 50 billion. So 5 times more work for taking care of the security as well, more or less. So, and if you think about these different kinds of things that will be connected to internet and all of these services, physical, virtual environments, clouds, all of these terminals, iPads, pads, phones, whatever, it's an enormous variety of different kinds of endpoints. Some of them are human controlled and some of them are not. So how do we secure all of this? That's a fair question, I would say. And about the threat landscape, so what happens in the dark side or in the gray area somewhere in between, as we would like to think that we are on the good side. So I think the latest news I read just a couple of days ago was about there will be a new search engine available in the dark side. You need to access through Tor network, obviously. So it's kind of the bad guys, Google, that if you wouldn't be after finding the opening hours of your favorite store, but you would actually looking for, I needed to find a good malware, or I needed to buy some drugs. Where should I get them? So you can actually just use the search engine and find your references from there. Quite handy. But also means that these tools and means to do something for us trying to desperately defend our environments of these things is just becoming much more easier. It's already kind of easy. You can easily find tools for doing attacks. You can buy zero-day malware, zero-day or unknown vulnerabilities for some specific applications if you like. If you have the funding and if you have the need, if you have the financial justification for doing something, even though you wouldn't be a hardcore coder, you can most likely get it done. Or if you can't, you can buy it as a service. Maybe that's even easier. Then you get an SLA that the job will get done. And maybe a couple of things worth mentioning about these different attack vectors I don't know how many of you have heard about or know about spear phishing or watering hole attack vectors. A few. So those are just these examples of today's security threats. So they very much rely on this human factor as well. But as we already learned today, the human factor is the weakest in the most case. That's the easiest one to crack. Then when that's cracked with some social engineering or so that we can make the target to believe that this information I'm receiving is actually fully legitimate, coming from my manager or my colleague or any of the people I know, because it looks exactly like that. So I'm obviously in goodwill enough to click, and then we have already lost, because that downloads some piece of malware into our environment or my machine that I don't even see anything happening. But then the attacker is already in. It's just a very short way of explaining a bit like how this spear phishing can work. So in that aspect, how we have been using and doing security until these days, it doesn't work. We can like name as many as we like these bad examples of then what happens. So those kind of attacks, they stay undiscovered for months or even years. Like, I don't know, you've probably seen the news last year from Finland, as our Ministry of Foreign Affairs discovered that, okay, we actually have been under an attack for quite a bit of time, but we just didn't know it. And these are the, coming back to the title of today's seminar, these are the bad or hard lessons we can learn from these cyber criminals. So learn it the hard way usually gives the motivation and the will to the organization to do something about it. But maybe the easier way would be actually to learn and examine a bit these things that have been happening to some other organizations and think about, are we actually defended against or protected against these kind of attacks if they would be happening to us? And the question, irrelevant question, is that kind of an attack never would happen to us. It doesn't have to be the same motivation for the attacker to attack you than the other organization that is totally different than yours. But the means might be closely the same. And so how about the infrastructure and the security infrastructure especially that many of us have nowadays to run these processes to secure our own dear environments? I think there's a lot of history burden there. So obviously we have been buying firewalls, antivirus, and etc., etc. Many of these solutions along the years, have been renewing them, have been buying a new box, maybe changing the vendor 1 year because they were saying that they have a better firewall than the other one. We can do a bit more. Fine, most likely being the case. But how do they actually respond to the need we have today? If you would be asking from your vendor these difficult questions, so when we talk about these advanced attacks, that by the way, by Verizon Business Internet Security Report was just released, the latest one got just released like a week ago or so, was saying that these advanced attacks are going down the scale in the organization size now. So they used to be more targeted to the high-end organizations, but nowadays they're actually scaling down. So mid-sized organizations seem to be the most wanted target for these attacks nowadays. So you can't say that it will never happen to me. It's more like an irresponsible way to say that, well, if we do this basic security for these basic attacks and threats, we should be fine. We shouldn't be worried about these advanced threats. It's like keeping your second eye or the other eye closed. I don't want to see what happens on that side. Because that's just the reality today. So siloed security solutions don't usually too well interact and share information and correlate information. What kind of capabilities we actually need for detecting these threats we have today. One way to explain this in a bit different way is that how we see that these attacks usually go. So we can say that we have named this to be an attack continuum. So how things usually happen. So there's always these before, during, and after stages, like in everything in life, but in security as well. So in the before stage, that's the most familiar field for us. It's the thing we've been doing for years. We have been building firewalls, policies, access control, hardening environments, patching, applications, and so on. Patching applications because there hasn't been yet too many perfect applications. No disregard to any of the developers of these applications, but that's just the way that things are. You probably know it yourself as well if you are in that field. You always have the pressure to follow the timeline and etc. All of these phases when you are developing something new, and later on there will be definitely some vulnerabilities discovered in any of these applications. So that stage isn't going to be enough, or hasn't been enough for years already. But we have been, how people usually behave, it's always most comfortable to do what we have been doing before. Change is always an extra effort. And so we have been very much relying on these things. And then years ago we already also discovered maybe we should actually do something a bit more. Try to see what we can actually pick up from the traffic. See if there's something malicious we can find by using an IPS solution or an antivirus solution or sandboxing solution that's been around for a couple of years, or 2 to 3 years now. That we would be able to do this point detection. Nothing beyond this point should be malicious as it's passing our defenses. That has actually taken us a bit further. So as we have been leading some of these tests that NSS Labs and Gartner and so on has been doing for years, we have been convicted to be the technology leader in the IPS industry by doing nowadays 99.4% of detection of everything known bad, which is a fairly good number. So then you might be thinking, okay, so why are you saying that this kind of isn't enough, because that's kind of your core offering? Yeah, that could be one point of view as well, but the other point of view is that I would be lying if I would be saying that would be enough, because of the most dangerous attacks actually pass this level as well. And if you would be our customer and I would be saying you're safe and then you wouldn't, you probably wouldn't be our customer then later on. So where we need to pay much more attention is this after stage. When something has passed our detection and defenses to our environment, is it then our data center? Is it any part of our environment? If there is something malicious, we definitely would like to know when that something starts behaving strangely, starts indicating that something is wrong, or we know from our external security intelligence that, by the way, this file consists some malicious bits. Wouldn't that be the thing you would like to know in that very second? And exactly where in your environment that is. That's probably in multiple places. Then it's a race against time, because even knowing it afterwards when you have had it in your environment, it's better than never, because then we come back to these very pitiful examples of breaches that like Target, the ministry in Finland, many of these other have been experiencing. They didn't know, the information got taken, game over. And obviously, these are the unfortunate results of these successful breaches that are happening because of these reasons. Depending on the organization, it's most likely one of these, or a combination of these. So, the new model, how these things should be done, it's surprisingly having some similar patterns than in the earlier slide. But what I'm trying to explain over here is that we actually need to be effective with work in all of these stages. We can't say that stop doing firewalling, don't use IPS, or just focus on doing the aftermath. That wouldn't be the way. There's plenty of solutions in the market that you can actually do these point improvements in some of these areas. Okay, so we have never done anything for being more efficient on containing and remediating our environment if we discover something. So let's put everything in there. That's most likely not the ideal way. But if we can actually effectively work in all of these stages, and what's important as well, extend this in all parts of our environment the way it's appropriate. Is it a virtual environment? Is it a physical environment? Is it a perimeter? Is it a data center? Is it any of these endpoints? We need to be able to apply this all over the place, and most likely to the encrypted traffic as well, because if some of these parts are missing, probably the whole exercise is useless if we are totally black and white and say that. Obviously, there are more critical points in your environment. One are more critical than the other. But the visibility of what's happening should be applied all over. And how we are then doing this? We have been naming 3 strategic imperatives that should apply. They are kind of building the foundation of being able to do this. First of all, it's about visibility, and not just any kind of visibility, but visibility with context. So you can understand context means that if you take one of my words out from this presentation, just that one word, and you would like to reason what that would mean, it probably wouldn't make that much sense. But if you know the whole story, the whole presentation, everything I've been saying over here, that word actually makes all the sense. You know exactly what that means. But same applies to the security as well. If we don't know the framework around these security events that we are so eager to detect with these solutions we have, we don't know actually what's happening around it. And this is exactly crucial for detecting these advanced attacks and threats we see nowadays. Because most likely, they are not something that we can detect by applying this signature or rule. We need to understand the bigger concept around these events, when, how, etc. it has been happening, and from where and where to target it. If we are missing this information, then it's very hard to say what that actually means. Most likely, you don't have the time and the effort to figure it out. You just pass it over. I don't have the time to look at this. Probably that doesn't mean anything. And that's usually the worst mistake you can do. So technology needs to provide you tools to be able to pinpoint. These are the ones I'm interested about. So that leads to the threat focus part. So the main focus and idea of security and these solutions should be able to provide you protection for and against all of these threats. Independent, are there these easy to catch traditional threats or these advanced persistent threats? So visibility makes the foundation for that. But then we need to apply a couple of other things as well. like external intelligence we are collecting, refining, and feeding you dynamically in these solutions and also available to be viewed on the side. So what we are discovering from the world out there, you most likely will benefit on securing your own environment. Correlating these things actually starts forming you a much clearer picture of what's happening, and if there's these sophisticated threats that are targeting your environment, then without having these, you probably wouldn't have an idea without this information. And then the platform-based, again, means that we need to be able to extend this the way it works the best in all parts of our environment. And everything needs to be managed as a whole. Otherwise, it, again, wouldn't work. Regarding this visibility, there's two vectors in visibility. There's the breadth, which means that we need to see from A to C in your environment, from the cloud to all of these wireless endpoints in all of these forms we have. But even more, we need to be able to see the depth. We need to have the depth in this information, in this security event information. That is the context part. Who, what, where, when, how, etc. So applying this is some great graphics. Our product marketing department has been brilliant. We can start seeing these things. And you can imagine, by seeing these things, how much more intelligent we can be, and the system can also be for us. The system can be for us making decisions on things without not having this information. So, again, some great graphics. This is showing the easy threats. We can say, we know that pattern, we can just wipe it away. But then we have these ones with a question mark. What the heck should we do about this? Because we don't know. When we are applying this context, we actually start learning a bit more about this event. We can start learning, is it generating some strange behavior in our environment? Is it taking connections to somewhere external, malicious IP address or bot network or similar that it shouldn't be ever, especially this IP address in our environment? And then again, we start seeing also some other strange behavior. All of a sudden, there's a malicious file seen in that same IP. And when these things start coming together, our intelligence of these attacks will be in a totally different level. And this is not something that you needed to be viewing from the screen all the time. How do I correlate this and this and this over here? This is something that the systems will do for you. You will have the focused view, what's happening, and be able to then let the system react or react yourself, depending on how your process will go. There's a few examples of our solutions down there by their names, what can be used and on these different stages. But as highlighted over here, the value of this collective security intelligence is growing very rapidly, especially against these advanced threats. You can think it like a process on working two ways. If you are discovering something and we are working it to be malicious with our process over there, you gain the information that this is malicious, we need to stop this traffic and these files moving on, etc. But also, if somebody else does the same, you can be protected against these things before you even know that these are targeted against you. So that's also something for being proactive. And I think this is pretty much actually explained already. So applying this to all of these parts in your network is very important. A few examples of our solutions, how they are placed in this model. I think how I would actually tune this a bit, that some of these solutions are extending, or the bars are actually extending, almost covering these all three areas. So, like for example, the NG IPS solution over there, or the malware protection solution over there, it's actually covering much more than is actually shown in here. That's about the interaction between these different solutions. Any questions so far? No. I think I have something like 10 minutes left. So, this is actually taking it a bit more in a practical level. So I'm aware that those were kind of in a concept level, how we see that things should be done. So there's a couple of examples of the solutions we have, that how we can actually do these things in real life. And this is not just something that we have in a PowerPoint where. So surprisingly, these three fields apply here as well. This is the SourceFire part of the Cisco security offering we are presenting for you today. And in the center over there, we have the intrusion prevention system that is extending in all of these directions, applying the external security intelligence we are providing. And you can see the contextual awareness layer in between, what I talked about, why we need to have context for these events. So this whole strategy actually comes pretty much from the SourceFire side, how we have been seeing these things should be done. And maybe one of the reasons why we have been so effective, not trying to be too bold on saying that, but that's just a fact. It's been very commonly said that we have been doing very much the right things in the past years. So about that context and visibility, so a practical example, we can see in real life, in real time, in your environment, all of these things. So thinking about how much context these things can provide for us and the system for making these security decisions, it's a huge amount of data, and it's in real time. So we could say that we are not missing too much action from your environment. And then applying this work, what we are collecting. We probably see like half of the email traffic in the world, and a great portion of the internet traffic in general in the world nowadays through our channels. We can be quite well aware of what's happening out there, and that's for your benefit, definitely. And how you can see that materializing for yourself is definitely the detection accuracy in the solutions, but also about anything malicious detected out there that might be potentially threatening your environment, and also about vulnerabilities in your environment. If we see that you have these systems in your environment, and we can correlate the vulnerability information of those, we can start making decisions. Are you actually vulnerable against these kind of attacks or not? That sounds very simple, but how you can actually do that in a solution requires some technology we've been developing for years. And what comes to detecting malware as part of our solution offering, this is the traditional way, I would say, today, using antivirus and sandboxing. Fair enough. We can probably do a fair amount of detecting all the malware. But then, unfortunately, the bad guys are awake as well, and they have figured that, okay, so these are the technologies that are being used today trying to detect these things. Virtual environments, sandboxing, and so on. And all in a sudden, we have a punch of malware that doesn't trigger in these environments. So, what to do then? We may have to be more clever we may have to accept the situation that we can't do everything on site. We need to build a bit more capability for this point detection. Many different kinds of testing and detection methods for these files that we can use, not just this one CPU or one unit over here in your environment, but the data center or data centers wide of CPU power and processes on running through these files. And that's what we are offering you as part of our service. And the second thing here is that still there will be malware that won't be detected even by these methods. So then we come back to this race against the time situation. As soon as we know, then we are in a hurry on applying protection for our environment of what's being detected to be a 0-day to avoid anything worse happening. Hopefully we have been early enough to do that. But you have to think about that's after everything we have been trying to do before to detect it and failed. If that scenario would happen, then we would still like to know early enough. The other option is that we wouldn't know at all before everything has already happened and the attacker has saying, thank you, bye. So I know this gets a bit technical, so I'm sorry about that, but the only way to explain this, so different bits of information we are able to see from different parts of our environment and also externally. So you are starting to think, so how in Earth can anyone collect these together and make sense? One would say, I need to buy a SIM solution. That's, you know, releasing me from all of my pain. But that's not the right answer. You know, if you've been working with SIM solutions, they are very thin on this depth of information. And exactly that depth is needed to be able to detect these things. The depth, or the lack of depth in these scenarios is that you need to standardize the logs for these solutions so that you can actually make them work in that SIM solution, and then you have lost the game. But if you are able to use these kind of solutions we are providing, we have developed these to work together originally from our own source. You can actually let the system intelligently correlate all of these different bits of information and provide you a clear, focused view on these advanced attacks. Obviously, there won't be a word that this is advanced attack A and B, because they don't have any names. But they are highlighting you. These are your hosts in your environment that are actually being most likely compromised. Then you need to do something about it. And then you say, why it has to be that? Why can I just apply a rule in the firewall and say, I don't want to let this happen ever after? If that's a clear case like that, fine. But most likely, many of these advanced attacks are not that simple to say. You probably need to have your CV ready if you are letting the system do those kind of things for these things. So your process needs to adjust a bit when you are starting to do these things as well, making sure that you have the resource and the expertise to deal with these things. Then, if you don't, there's probably plenty of us available willing to help you. So summary over here, soon running out of time, as I usually do. What we can provide you is a real-time view on all of these things we have been discussing from your own environment. We are able to say which events are critical and which are not. We can help you automatically tune your security posture in your environment to be in an optimal position all the time. And we can also make differences on which parts of your environments are more critical than the others, making the systems and helping your processes work accordingly. We call it as an advanced threat protection solution. Happy to talk to you more about it after the presentation or anytime you like. There will be these small info cards available in the gift desk outside the seminar room. So there's a code, and you can actually access many of our materials by reading this code. And there's still some of these calendars over there left, so a couple of questions might be useful at the end. I just want to show you these quickly. So these are the official numbers we've been receiving, providing protection to our customers. And Gartner says we are over there. Didn't want to spend all the presentation time of showing these. I guess that's kind of enough for those. Thank you. Now we need to have those questions.
Any questions?
I need to do some marketing over here. So we have been doing these Nord calendars for over 10 years. There's always a theme per year. And this year we have like famous sports events. And there's 3 of them over here. So don't mind about your questions, just ask something. No? Why this always happens to me? Okay, I can leave these over there on the table as well, so you, 3 quickest ones can pick them from there. And I'll be outside for a bit, so if you have any questions you want to talk in private, please do. Thank you.